I'm Kate Partridge, and you're watching the latest headlines here at RT International. Thank you for joining us. If you decide to challenge America's experiment in democracy, it's going to be your worst day. Those were the words of US Defense Secretary James Mattis as he unveiled America's new defense strategy, which will now primarily focus on deterring Russia and China.
We will continue to prosecute the campaign against terrorists that we're engaged in today, but great power competition, not terrorism, is now the primary focus of U.S. national security.
First and foremost, this America's defense strategy, so to speak, is so much on the offensive side of the tracks. It almost makes you think that someone copy and pasted the old name into the headline space. So it's the first time since the Cold War American military is focusing on this great competition of powers. So this can really be seen as sort of that sort of mentality making a comeback. What it also means is the infamous war on terror is taking the backseat. It is being put on the back burner, so to speak. Instead, Washington is focusing on Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. But really, the Pentagon is singling out Moscow and Beijing. Have a listen.
We face growing threats from revisionist powers as different as China and Russia are from each other. Nations that do seek to create a world consistent with their authoritarian models, pursuing veto authority over other nations' economic, diplomatic, and security decisions.
The doctrine calls for modernization. What would you expect to see?
Well, another word used by the U.S. Defense Secretary was fundamental. This is how he characterized this modernization that he's been talking about. And mostly the Pentagon is going to be focusing on space, on cybersecurity, and on its nuclear program. So in terms of cybersecurity, they're going to be overhauling the whole thing, really. We don't know the details yet, but obviously big changes are coming up, especially with all the Russia and China hackers craze. In terms of the nuclear program, they're seeing it as a reaction, as sort of a reaction to what Russia has been doing in this sphere.
Certainly, if you're talking about outer space and defense positioned up there, this is not going to be cheap. What's the money being talked about?
The Secretary of Defense used this opportunity to ask for more money, or at least, make a step in that direction, saying that budget cuts have arguably delivered the worst blows to the Pentagon and to the U.S. national defense. But at the same time, you have to remember that it's not only about how much money the Pentagon gets, but also how it chooses to spend it. For example, hundreds of billions of dollars have been splashed out on the new F-35 fighter jet, and that development hasn't been even past the most basic stages.
Well, the executive director of the Ron Paul Institute, Daniel McAdams, sees the change in U.S. rhetoric as dangerous.
There's a big threat that the U.S. is going to shift from so-called soft power to hard power. And we're supposedly seeing a decline in diplomacy in the State Department, and Secretary of State Tillerson is supposedly taking on less of a role. On the ground, it's a predictable thing. This is essentially a rehash of the old Wolfowitz doctrine of 1994. There is no new thinking involved. The U.S. must remain the sole superpower on earth. We must do anything we can, move heaven and earth, spend untold amounts of money to prevent any rivals from coming up to challenge us. The U.S. is essentially guilty of doing all the things that it accuses Russia and China of doing, including attempting to have more influence in the South China Sea and in East Asia. So it really is a superpower that is, unfortunately, because of its hyper-interventionism, on the wane in terms of influence. And of course, it is a very dangerous thing because a cornered animal is more likely to attack.